The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Please. Thank you. We are back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. Do you remember when you were 12 and innocent, Claire Elizabeth Hall?
I certainly do, Ralph Tycho.
All right. Well, I don't even remember innocence in my life anymore, but I hope to have you in a good cheer when you remember what it was like to be 12 and a baseball fan. And,
yeah.
Great. Take it away for a while. And
okay.
What year were you actually 12? I think it was 1971 by my calculation.
You are correct. On September 27th, 1971, I turned 12 years old because I had been born September 27th of 1959, a birthday which, incidentally, I share, although both these gentlemen were born 10 years earlier to the day, Michael Jack Schmidt and Meatloaf. Yeah, how about that? And the following summer, 1972, Mike Schmidt would be just a couple of hundred miles away from me in Eugene, Oregon, really clearing his path to the majors with the Eugene Emeralds. But the thing I remember most vividly about 1971 and baseball, of course, is the World Series and the matchup that year between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Baltimore Orioles. Neither of those teams would I classify as my favorite teams, and yet the Orioles to a lesser extent and the Pirates of the 70s are certainly teams that live on with great fondness in my memory. I mean, that remarkable Orioles pitching staff the year before, Palmer and Cuellar and Dobson and McNally, the last time, I'm sure, unless there's radical changes in our game, the last time ever you'll see one team with 4 20-game winners. And, of course,
win 20 games. That was incredible. And I just want to note that those Pittsburgh Pirates, I was really rooting in the playoffs for the Giants that year. That was a hell of a series, and I remember Bruce Keeson getting married and going away in a helicopter because he had a scheduled wedding, and they took him away in a helicopter. That's all I remember about that. But
that's a great story. That's one I don't remember, and that was definitely, that 71 National League playoff was a case of divided loyalties for me because, growing up in Portland, Oregon, aside from the one-year fiasco of the Seattle Pilots, the San Francisco Giants were the closest thing that I had to a hometown team. So, of course, and Willie Mays was my childhood baseball history. So I was pulling for them in that playoff, and yet when they lost, I said, okay, come on, Buccos, come on, Pirates. I mean, so many memorable men on that team. Of course, Roberto Clemente, who is right
with him.
Yeah, I mean, right next to Jackie Robinson. I mean, if there is true, something beyond the Hall of Fame, a baseball Hall of Saints, you start with Jackie and Roberto, and then everybody else is a lesser being. And Pop Stargell, I mean, maybe, okay, he's still Willie Stargell in 1971. He hasn't quite emerged as perhaps the father in the clubhouse, giving out the stars that he was for the 79 team. But Steve Blass, a pitcher who, I don't know, just truly one of the great enigmas of the game. And, for me, and I imagine for you too, but tell me if it's true, when I think of truly iconic baseball photos, the shot of Blass leaping into the air after the final out of that series. I mean, what a perfect moment of frozen joy that lives on in our hearts and our memories forever, huh?
Oh, I'll tell you, just your talk elicits memories for me. Here's one. You mentioned the Eugene Emeralds. When I was the Tops representative, where I went to the minor leagues and signed players to their contracts on behalf of Tops to obligate them to the Tops baseball cards and obligate us to use their picture. The Eugene Emeralds were my favorite stop. They were halfway between Everett and I guess it was what's the city in Oregon?
Ashland or
the A's were up there for a long time in a city right across the border from California. I'm trying to think. Either Medford or Ashland. Those are the two big populations. It was Medford, and headed up. Shout out to the owner of, this is 30 years ago, the owner of the Portland or the Eugene Emeralds was a fellow by the name of Beban. Beban. I don't know if you know him. He's the owner. And his wife was spectacularly beautiful. Now, you want to talk about good memories. I wasn't 12, but it was more than 12 years ago, and I still remember that. And I want to just tell you that Pop Stargill went to high school in Alameda, my adopted hometown, and Encinal High School is about 5 blocks from where I live. And in the back of Encinal High School, there's a field called Willie Stargill Field, and they named a block in Alameda Wilver Stargill. It wasn't Willie. It was Wilver Stargill. I had never heard a name like Wilver, I think, until Mr. Ed. That was his
Wilver. Yeah, close enough.
Close enough for Governor Wilkes. I want to tell you that your talk just inspired memories for me too. What do you miss about baseball in those days compared to what it is now? What has the evolution been like that you didn't like? And I'd like you to, if you would come up with something that you like about today's baseball game.
Now you're going to make it tough for me. No, there are things I like about
anybody can say, boy, the field is green. What do you like about that, first base? But what's good? I like to have something positive. What's good in today's game, Claire?
Can I think about that and we get back to that later in the program? Because my head is so much in 1971 right now. You've taken me back, my God, 50 years. It's not possible. It's not possible that was 50 years ago, because to me it's yesterday. I mean, you have now put me on my parents' couch at our little bungalow in Northeast Portland, and I tend to think, maybe I'm wrong, but I tend to think as a 12-year-old, I had a far greater sense of history than the average 12-year-old. Certainly not restricted to baseball, but baseball as well. And I remember the opening games of that series, and then Tuesday night, Game 3 at Pittsburgh, and the television coverage. And they made such a big deal about the fact that this was the first night game in the history of the World Series. And,
I didn't remember that.
Yes, going back to 1903, every World Series game has been played in the sunshine, and yet here they were at night. And again, it's kind of odd, but kind of wonderful the way I can access my 12-year-old memories. And I remember sitting there kind of thinking, ooh, this is different. This is new. This is nice. But then, you know, for a few more years, we continued with weekend games in the daytime. And then the god of money took over, as it always does in baseball and just about everything else. And day World Series games became a thing of the past. And I truly think, you know, that's tragic.
Absolutely. When a kid can't stay up for a game, for a World Series game, that's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So today, you know, and another reason why I think, you know, again, setting myself back in the 8, 10, 12-year-old mindset, and I know this is not loving the game of today, but I really think a big part of why I fell in love with the game was because of, you know, and I'm in the get off my lawn phase of life now, I guess, but I absolutely loved the fact that the National League and American League had such distinctive identities, and I didn't realize it at the time, but, you know, the National League was the more exciting, more aggressive, you know, style of play as opposed to the laid-back American League. Well, you know, good old Earl Weaver, the Earl of Baltimore, managing the Orioles in that series. You know, you win by pitching and 3-run homers. God, I love the aggressive play of the aggressive style of the National League so much more, and I realize only in retrospect that was because the National League, thanks to Branch Rickey, was so much more aggressive in integrating than the American was.
No question about that. I think that's what led to the National League dominance in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Such great Hall of Famers like Aaron and Frank Robinson and the aforementioned Clemente and, of course,
Willie May.
Yes.
McCovey and Stargell and
Mazeroski.
Oh, God.
Not just sluggers.
That's right. I've pulled up the roster of both of those teams, and, you know, certainly the names that echo right down to today are with us. But think about a guy like Bob Robertson, the Pirates' regular first baseman in that era. We don't talk a lot about him today, but 26 homers, 271 average. You know, Richie Hebner, the grave digger, and we always remember Richie. Yeah, I mean, you know, because again, I think we lost something so precious, so relatable. You know, the days when baseball players weren't multi-millionaires, weren't living totally in bubbles, you know, when you could be a kid in Brooklyn in the 50s and see Duke Snyder riding on the L train with you on the way to the game at Ebbets Field, or knowing that Richie Hebner actually dug graves in the off season to help pay his bills. I mean, what happened? Yeah,
and it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt building up strength either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who brought you to the game?
Oliver. Huh? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Al Oliver is certainly worth man. That was a hitting machine, Al Oliver.
Oh my God, yeah, the regular center fielder that year, guy who won 4 batting titles and yet doesn't seem to get even a passing mention for the Hall of Fame. God, guys on the roster like Vic Davalillo and Mazeroski, who by that year was, I believe, a year away from retirement, and or maybe was that his final year, but still part of that team. Rennie Stennett, not yet blossoming into his stardom. Kid named Richie Zisk, 22 years old, only got into 7 games for those Pirates, but still was on the roster. I'm jumping over to Baltimore now, and okay, come on, computer, help me out there. But, I think of a guy like Andy Etchebarren catching, the greatest unibrow in baseball since Wally Moon. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, except for the bat boy of the Dodgers, who they nicknamed the Brow.
Oh, Charlie the Brow, but yeah. Boog Powell playing first for those Orioles, and
oh yes,
what a steady, great slugger, and of course, though, associations that trigger in my mind. After all those wonderful years in Baltimore, he ends up in, and anybody who can picture Boog, a tall and I'm not going to call him a fat man, but definitely a large, stout man. And when he appeared, I believe in about 1979, in those god-awful all-red uniforms that the Indians wore, and he said to reporters in the clubhouse, "I look like a giant blood clot."
Well, what's interesting, when I think of those uniforms, Frank Robinson managed the Indians and wore that uniform on the first day he managed the Indians, and came off the bench and hit a home run. If I'm not.
Yeah.
So
vividly, I remember that, and to me, the name lives on, but yet I have said more than once in many Facebook baseball discussion groups, I would nominate that man for probably certainly the most underappreciated player of his era, and maybe in baseball history. MVP in both leagues, and oh my God, so close to 600 home runs and 3,000 hits in the pre-Peds era, when those were truly, truly significant milestones. And, I still recall the joy I felt when he was named player manager of the Indians, and the sadness that I felt that Jackie Robinson was not there to see that day, because we're talking 1971, but another image that is indelibly burned into my brain is Jackie at the 1972 World Series, throwing out that first pitch. And, I knew who Jackie was. I knew his pioneering role. And I looked at this white-haired, almost blind man, and, again, in my, 13-year-old mind, I was not able fully to do the calculus that, this is a human being who has endured things that no human being ever should have had to endure, and yet he did. And when he said how much happier he would feel if he looked over in one of those dugouts and saw a black manager, and he was dead about 2 weeks later. And I just even remember when Frank Robinson was named a manager, how much I wished Jackie had lived to see that day.
Claire, who brought you to baseball? as a mentor? Was it your dad? And who introduced you to those Dodgers who have become so beloved in your mind?
Ooh, that's a great question, and there isn't a simple, direct answer. I mean, my dad, frankly, he enjoyed baseball, but he was not a passionate fan. Some of my most precious memories with him, though, are attending games of the Portland Mavericks, that I bet a lot of our listeners will know as the Battered Bastards of Baseball, that wonderful Netflix film. But, thanks to growing up in Portland and my dad's willingness to take me, I probably saw at least 24 Mavericks games over their 5-year history. And if you ever want to do a whole program about life as a Mavericks fan, I would be happy to do that. But
I have a question just off the top of my head about the Portland franchise. Do you remember when the Portland Rockies played in that AAA ball club? They were a short A.
Short
team,
A. Yep.
And they run by a fellow by the name of Jack Kane.
Yes,
and
very much so. Yep.
He also had a lovely wife who was a dancer, if I'm not mistaken. I got a memory 30 years ago.
About that, but that could be.
She was a dance teacher. In any event, they broke all minor league attendance records for short A A baseball. And I produced and narrated a documentary that I'm trying to get on. I've got it on a VCR, and I'm trying to transfer it to get it on YouTube. It was It was about that Portland Rocky team. And,
I would love to see that. You would Portland never embraced AAA ball, but God, they sure did embrace single A ball. The Mavericks in the 70s and the Rockies in the 90s, and my love for the Brooklyn Dodgers, I've got to credit it to somehow, as a 9-year-old going on 10, somehow getting caught up in the fever, the beautiful fever of the summer of '69, and the Miracle Mets march to the pennant, and Gil Hodges, it all, for me in baseball, as you well know, my friend, it all goes back to Gil Hodges. And I don't know, 2 or 3 years after that, in a used bookstore in Portland, picking up a paperback copy of The Boys of Summer, and seeing the picture of Ebbets Field on the cover, and turning over the back cover and seeing the picture of, that beautiful sport magazine picture from 1956 of the Boys of Summer gathered around the batting cage, and reading that book, which truly was, I've got to call it truly one of the most transformational books in my life, in so many aspects. What a dream I fulfilled in 2016 when, thanks to a mutual friend, I actually got to spend 4.5 hours with Carl Erskine. The next year, yes. And what a glorious human being that man is. And then the next year, if you remember the closing sequence of The Boys of Summer, where Roger Kahn revisits the site of Ebbets Field, and at that moment, probably 1972-73, I said, I must make a pilgrimage to this property. And finally, in 2017, I was able to do so. And even though the reminders that Ebbets Field stood there are few, I knew that I was on holy ground. I felt the energy. I felt the 47 years of communion between the Brooklyn Dodgers and their fans and the people of Brooklyn. And as the group of us drove away from the site, I said, I'm hearing crowd noise in the distance, distant but distinct, and I absolutely know it's a Brooklyn Dodger crowd. And one of my compatriots said, how do you know that, Claire? And I said, it's because I hear Hilda Chester's cowbell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Those are some memories.
Indeed.
Are some memories.
Indeed. And
I've got, just you're saying that, I've got goosebumps, and I was a Giant fan. But my Aunt Sonny lived on Bedford Avenue, right across from Ebbets Field. And when I would go there with my grandfather, he would point up and say, that's Aunt Sonny's apartment right there. I'm 4.5 years old, and in 1951, and my grandfather took me to all 3 stadiums or ballparks in New York. And
you had a blessed experience, my friend.
Oh yes, he took me to Yankee Stadium and pointed out that Joe DiMaggio was playing in his last year. I don't remember if it was the last game. I don't think it was. But he kept saying, remember, you saw Joe DiMaggio, the great Joe DiMaggio. He worshiped Joe DiMaggio. And Willie Mays, as it turns out, worshiped Joe DiMaggio as well. So, and by the way, the great announcer for the Dodgers, Vin Scully, grew up a Giant fan, and his hero was Mel Ott. So,
I knew that, my friend. But I mean, I if you want me to pollute your airwaves again, I mean, you have just triggered so many beautiful stories, so many beautiful memories, and promise me at the very least, you will let me be a guest on the day in December of this year, 2021, when the Veterans Committee finally rights one of the greatest wrongs in Hall of Fame history, and Gilbert Ray Hodges is finally accorded his rightful place in the Hall of Fame.
You've got a date, my friend, and these microphones are always open to Claire Elizabeth Hall. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure.
You come back soon, and I'm sorry I hogged up my memories.
No.
A little bit.
That's the fun of this.
I'll tell you, you mentioned Vic Davalio. I'm old enough to remember when his brother, Pompeo...
Yo-Yo.
Yes, Yo-Yo. Wow, you've got that mind as well. Washington Senators. And years ago.
First in war, first in peace, and last in the American League.
Yes.
And you know the St. Louis version of that? First in shoes, first in booze, and last in the American League.
That's
my
good.
Dear friend. I mean, I think this half hour we've captured the beauty, the magic, the love of baseball, and I just really hope the current generations, I doubt, and yet I earnestly hope I'm wrong, that baseball becomes the part of the fabric of their life to the extent it has for you and for me and for millions of others.
That would be wonderful. We will talk again very soon, and here's to Gilbert Hodges. And
thank you.
His eventual... Well, I want us both to live to see that. Me, not because of his Dodger memories, the miracle rise that the 69 Mets took part in. I was a Met fan originally, and that was as wonderful a memory to me as any in baseball, and he was directly responsible for that. No Gil Hodges, no way do they win.
You want a whole program about Gil Hodges and the '69 Mets. I'm your girl.
All right, my friend. Delighted to have you as my friend. I know you've got to go, and
I do. Unfortunately, work calls, but this is joy. But then work calls, so we'll do that.
Sometimes you get to combine the two, joy and work, and that happens all the time. I hope this rest of the day is joyful for you, and the memories were fun.
Thank you, my friend.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The guest was Claire Elizabeth Hall, and I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of the entire network. Happy trails, everybody.
Happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.